Tales for Dark Nights.
Want to make sure you never miss a Chilling Tales for Dark Nights video again? Be sure to subscribe and hit that bell to turn on notifications.
Up. Chicago was another place of note which Supreme had never been to before. Once again, not for lack of interest, as he had heard that hot dogs were to Chicago what pizza is to New York, or drunken fistfights over baseball scores were to Boston. In short, what the city was famous for. And as a regular consumer of questionable garbage food items, the origins of which are typically best left disregarded, Supreme felt trying out a proper Chicago dog would be a pleasant bonus for him in the course of carrying out his new mission. Despite him being but a mere comedian, this Crip character had caught Supreme's attention. Not the greatest of detectives, he had decided perhaps this wheelchair-bound trash talker might at least help point him in the right direction in his newfound quest to uncover the deep state. Additionally, though an utterly pointless thing to remark upon or care about, he felt somewhat resentful over being the butt of a joke which both readdressed the Nazi accusations, while also making fun of the style of which he was increasingly uncertain over. As such, after a cursory check through social media, it took only a few minutes for Supreme to find an ad for an upcoming stand-up comedy show where this Crip, who he soon learned was named Donovan, would be opening for another comic at some downtown theater. Tickets had already been sold out, but not one for stand-up beyond that of one act he caught involving puppets. Supreme was not bothered by this. It shouldn't prove to be too difficult, at least, to confront him after the show. He had thought of creating a grand spectacle by entering through perhaps the roof and flying in to confront him publicly in the middle of his performance, but then realized that in all likelihood he would only end up crushing or injuring people in the crowd with the falling debris he'd created, and likely wouldn't get as warm a reception as he'd like were he to interrupt a show people had paid to see. As he flew towards the windy city, such thoughts mulling in his mind and a whole host of imagined conversations and confrontations playing out in his imagination, he felt a moment of pride, realizing such was further evidence of his growing, albeit still stunted overall maturity. This moment passed, however, as he came to land in the alleyway behind the theater. It looked straight out of a movie to him, the backstage door. The place that rock stars and celebrities would shuffle out to avoid paparazzi and crushing waves of fans. It was empty, but not without a charm. Using his enhanced hearing, Supreme managed to tune his ears into the show going on inside. He could hear the very clear and very identifiable voice of Crip, who seemed to be finishing a joke.
See, I don't judge all of these superheroes the same. I'm in a fucking wheelchair, so I really can't. Supreme, I think the only thing that guy and I have in common is how often dumbasses on Twitter call us a Nazi. Me because I make fun of those people, and him because he hangs out at Nazi rallies. Aside from just that one thing though, fuck that guy. It's not even that he might be a Nazi, it's that he's the worst thing to fly out of Boston since American Airlines on 9/11.
A clearly strained hush fell over the half of the crowd which didn't laugh. Crip continued.
What? I'm sorry. I didn't know this was a family reunion for Pete Davidson. Maybe you should be a superhero. Makes as much sense as Supreme. He dresses like a hype beast clown from 2016.
Crip said, pausing for laughter, which, as it rose, made Supreme squirm.
He's not remotely funny, but he still got on Hogan before I did, and let's be honest, what the fuck is he doing with that robot guy? Is he like so powerful he can't fuck a normal sex bot like the rest of us?
Crip paused again, grinning.
See, now you're wondering just how much you have in common with Pete Davidson and completely forgot about Supreme, didn't you?
At that, even Supreme found himself chuckling a bit, as he had to admit it was kinda funny. Crip continued.
I guess in the end, I can at least be happy that most of those other dipshits who went out to fight crime are now more like me than him. Broken-ass bodies, lifetime in a wheelchair, and not a single one of them is likely ever going to fuck again. So I guess even if they didn't uphold the law, there's some kind of justice there.
He paused once more for laughter before finishing by introducing the headliner.
Well, shit. You guys have been great. That's my time. Have a great night.
The crowd cheered wildly, and once again. This time, for an extended period, as Crip presumably was wheeled off stage while the main comic of the night took the microphone. Supreme had, for some reason, assumed Crip would immediately exit the building once his set was over, but instead, it was clear he was hanging around for the duration of the show. He didn't mind waiting, however, as though unfamiliar with the main act, whose name he'd already forgotten, he found the raunchy, vulgar, but undeniably honest routine he eavesdropped on hilarious. An opening set consisting of nearly 15 minutes about dead children and how stupid buying graveyard real estate was, followed by stories of what ordinary people would call embarrassing sexual encounters from his past, the idiocy of politics, and a host of other hilarious points of view Supreme had never considered. He was actually surprised by how short the time seemed to fly by, at least while listening in on the show, all the while keeping his eyes peeled at the metal doorway. While he could very easily pull the doors clean off their hinges, let alone just open, he was slowly learning to avoid needless spectacle. After some half hour or so, during which time, as he leaned in and listened closer, he could hear not only the audience shuffling out of the theater, but the chatter backstage between the comics. A short, yellow school bus, the word school painted over, pulled up in the alley. No sooner had it done so than did the metal double doors to the theater swing open, allowing a large plume of marijuana smoke to escape. It added a bit of extra dramatic flair to what came next, as sitting within his motorized power wheelchair, Crip emerged. His eyes were bloodshot as Hogan's had been before, and across his face, a bent and crooked smile went from ear to ear. It was not bent or crooked merely in the aesthetic sense, though it was a bit uneven, but more it conveyed a genuine joy at having once again gotten away scot-free with telling what polite society would regard as terribly controversial, if not downright offensive jokes. Supreme had to give it to him, though, as the short bit of his set that he'd heard upon arrival was pretty funny at spots. Crip began rolling towards the bus, where the driver, presumably his mother, had begun lowering the wheelchair lift. Before reaching it, though, he stopped abruptly and spun about to face Supreme. He wore a bright pink t-shirt which read, "Queer and Disabled," and looking upon Supreme, raised an eyebrow.
No fucking way,
he said with a chuckle.
Are you actually him?
Supreme stood tall and answered. Yeah, the one and only, he answered with the same false bravado he typically spoke with when in character.
Bullshit,
Crip replied with a laugh. No, I really am me. I am Supreme, Supreme replied, taken aback just a bit.
Mom, bring me a spliff, would you?
Crip shouted over his shoulder to the bus driver, who stood just at the end of the lift.
Do you want your Hunter Thompson cigarette holder thing?
She replied, half stepping back into the bus.
You bet your ass I do,
Crip answered, returning his gaze to Supreme.
How about you prove it then?
He said to the confused superhero. A moment later, she emerged from the short bus carrying an unlit joint and an old-timey cigarette holder. Approaching Crip, she nodded at Supreme, slightly confused at the sight of him, and placing the holder into her son's mouth, went to light it before Crip shook his head. Through the gritted teeth which held the cigarette holder in his mouth, he continued.
Think you can light this thing with your laser eyes?
He challenged. Supreme paused, but then nodded. Yeah, I can do that. Then squinting his eyes and focusing carefully, Supreme let a thin beam of energy shoot from his eyes to the rolled paper joint. However, rather than merely lighting a tip, Supreme quite purposely burned the entire thing to ash. Crip shot him a sideways look and spat the holder out onto the concrete below.
Well, that was a dick move,
he said snidely. No, you know what's a dick move? Telling people I'm some fucking secret government Nazi when I'm not! Supreme spat back.
What? I didn't say you were a Nazi. The fuck is this?
Yeah, you did. On Twitter. Josh Hogan showed me.
Wait, that tweet? I wasn't saying you were a Nazi. I was saying you dressed like a 2018 hype beast date rapist,
Crip replied, with all of the indignity of a man wronged. The reference flew somewhat over Supreme's head, aside from the understanding that he was again making fun of his outfit. A lot of people seemed to be doing that, he had noticed. He never quite understood why, as to him, such expensive gear was still the height of men's fashion. The fuck is that supposed to mean? He asked defensively.
That you look like a kind of guy who thinks TGI Fridays is fine dining?
What? Supreme was getting more lost and more annoyed by the second.
You look like the sort of guy who considers half a can of Axe and a breath mint to be a shower.
Alright, listen, you little shit, Supreme shouted, now well beyond both confused and pissed.
Oh my fucking god! You're a superhero who flies across the country to pick on a crippled comedian. This is fucking hilarious,
Crip said, bursting out in open laughter. This caused Supreme to pause a moment. He hadn't planned on hurting Crip. In truth, he hadn't planned anything, short of asking him what the deep state was and how to find them. Though he could have easily Googled the question, or even asked Hogan, who was apparently quite the enthusiast in regards to the theory. Neither had crossed his mind, as the mix of insult and interference was enough to set his sights on Crip, even though he had no idea what he'd do once he found him. You know what? Fuck it, never mind, Supreme muttered. Somewhat defeated, turned and began to walk off. Crip's chuckle continued, but abated slightly as he saw the butt of his joke turn his back, seemingly to sulk slightly.
Wait a second, you didn't seriously fly all the way here just to say you're not a Nazi, did you?
Supreme stopped in his tracks. No, not just that, he said over his shoulder.
So what is it then?
Crip asked, now genuinely curious as to why this international menace had thought to seek him out. Supreme turned around once again. Well, what do you know about the dark state? He asked, almost timidly, not wishing to sound any dumber than he already felt.
Do you mean the deep state?
Crip asked in return, now genuinely curious, and smelling the beginning of a fantastic bit. Yeah, that's it. People have been saying I'm part of it, whatever it is.
And you thought a crippled comedian from Chicago was the guy to ask about it?
Crip said, more as a statement than a question, cutting Supreme off midway. You know, when you put it like that, it does sound pretty stupid. Never mind, Crip cut him off again, not wishing to lose such a golden opportunity.
No, it's fine. You found the right guy. What is it you want to know?
Well, for starters, what is it? I know it's a secret government thing, but what is it, and why do people think I'm a part of it? Crip struggled desperately to contain the dastardly smirk that wanted so desperately to cross his face. Composing himself, he looked Supreme dead in the eye before speaking.
It is. It's a secret government thing. It's a government behind the government. They're pretty much the ones responsible for every bad thing that happens,
he explained, working extra to suppress a giggle as he knew absolutely nothing about the deep state theory beyond what sounded funny online, but was at the same time very good at making shit up as he went along. But why?
Because they can, dude. Because they can.
Supreme thought on this for a moment, Initially, the idea of being a destructive force unleashing hell across the globe just because seemed absurd to him. That was until, however, another pesky glimmer of self-awareness washed over him. Suddenly, everything made a dark and disturbing kind of sense. Crip, on the other hand, was scrunching his brow as he watched this very simple mind roll the very simple concept presented to it around over and over again. The brow scrunching, however, was less understanding and more an attempt to look sympathetic and understanding as the corner of his lips curled upwards into a grin he could no longer suppress. It was all just too damn funny. Could you tell me more about these guys? Like, who they are, how to find them? Supreme asked.
Absolutely,
Crip said. Suddenly the dam burst, and his laughter cascaded throughout the alleyway. Had he the physical ability to do so, he'd have probably doubled over in laughter. Instead, tears of mirth flowed freely from his eyes as his cackle continued. Supreme looked dubiously at him, before he realized his mistake and regained his composure.
Sorry,
Crip wheezed.
I'm sorry. It's just...
He thought quickly, knowing there were few options to cover his laughter with.
It's just... I've been waiting for someone like you to help me take them down for a long time. And now, here we are.
This was going to be comedy gold. He was certain of it. The troll of all trolls, and the story of all stories. So, what are you suggesting? Supreme asked, his interest piquing.
Okay, a couple questions in mind first. For starters, is there food at your secret hideout?
Supreme shrugged. A bit. I mean, if I need anything, I just go get it.
Good. Second, is there Wi-Fi?
Supreme nodded. Surprisingly enough, yeah, there's 5G up there.
Good enough. Third, do you have any weed, or do I need to bring my own?
Supreme paused. Wait, so...
Listen, big guy. If we're gonna take down these fuckers, I'm gonna need you to bring me into your inner circle. You have an inner circle?
Well, there's me, and there's Mark. He's the mechanoid guy.
Mark the Mechanoid? Is that like his actual hero name?
Crip asked, stifling yet another laugh. Supreme chuckled. It is since I decided it was. Crip let a snigger escape him.
Okay then. Well then I'm going to need to join the team. It'll be like an utterly able three-way between us.
So should we call you? Crip cut him off once more.
Don't you even fucking say it.
Really? Come on.
No.
I'm Supreme. He's Mark the Mechanoid.
And you're...
Crip shot him a look of pure venom. Supreme continued.
Wheels! Fuck no!
Crip exclaimed.
Come on! Listen. Do you want to take down the secret shadow government or not? Because if you do not fucking call me that. Not because it's offensive. Because it's fucking retarded.
Isn't the word retarded offensive now or something? Supreme asked.
Not as offensive as calling a guy in a fucking wheelchair wheels. I'm disabled. That's retarded. Are you fucking retarded?
No, Supreme replied defensively.
Good. Now we have that in common at least.
The two stared at one another, as though in the most awkward and impossible standoff in history. Both were sizing each other up. Supreme wondering just what secrets the little man in the wheelchair might know. Crip wondering just how far he could take this bit, and whether the dopey-looking super-powered hype beast before him would ever catch on or get it at all. Then Crip turned his head to shout over his shoulder once more.
Hey, Mom!
Crip hollered over his head.
Yeah, honey?
His mother/driver/manager replied, poking her head out from the open passenger door.
Grab my overnight bag. And my weed.
You have, like, a face mask or anything? Goggles or the like? Supreme asked.
Why?
It gets a little windy. Soon, Crip was soaring into the air. The closest thing he had to a mask was a thin plastic face shield, the type usually used by surgeons and dentists. As Supreme effortlessly lifted the heavy power chair into the air, Crip looked down in wonder at the sight of his mother, his bus, the alley, and the theater, as they all shrank away with the altitude. He, like most people, had never experienced such a flight, and always wanted to find the irony in things. He giggled a bit to himself as he considered that, though he had never walked, nor would ever walk, he, unlike most perfectly able-bodied people, was now flying in a way wholly unnatural to human beings. The joy increased as they began taking off, flying higher, and out over the city of Chicago, presumably east from Crip's best guess and estimate. He wished then he could spread his arms as they soared further upwards and outwards, the notion quickly being made a joke, as similar scenes from the movie Titanic immediately made comparisons within his mind. However, as they picked up speed, the thrill of flight gradually gave way to the harsher physical realities of flying closer and closer to commercial airline speeds without the benefit of a climate-controlled metal shell. The wind speed, that seemed to grow exponentially in strength as they picked up speed themselves, soon began chilling him to the bone. The plastic face shield, while keeping the strong winds from truly battering his face, still managed to curl around the sides of the thin plastic sheet and shoot straight down the back of his shirt, freezing his torso from within. He silently thanked his legs and lower body for being unable to feel anything as the whipping cold grew more and more intense. Without any way to signal Supreme, given the roar of the air whipping around him, he resigned himself then to simply suffering or dying as a result of their trip. Crip was no stranger to death, as such had stalked him relentlessly since birth. Though he'd rather continue on defying the odds, as he had thus far, he did think it would be rather funny if the world's strongest Superman inadvertently killed a disabled person and beaten all other odds, adding to his infamy while letting Crip effectively be and have the last laugh. However, despite the brutal cold and immense discomfort, they eventually came to land outside of a dilapidated warehouse deep in the forest in what Crip was sure was the township of literally fucking nowhere. "Welcome to my lair," Supreme said as the pair touched down.
It's...
Crip began. "Dope, right?"
It's a dump.
Crip finished after a moment's hesitation. Supreme furrowed his brow, slightly offended, slightly confused. "But you haven't seen the inside yet," he argued, stepping toward the large bay door and gesturing for Crip to follow. Crip pressed forward on the control stick of his power chair and felt the machine lurch and wobble along the uneven ground of packed dirt and fallen forest debris. Slowly, he made his way over to the large bay door, at one point dreadfully certain he was about to tip and topple over. It was his first time properly off-roading with his chair, and for what little experience he gained with it, determined in short order that he did not care for it. Once inside, he glanced around the large cavernous space. A living room set of sorts was set up a few yards from the door in an odd configuration that looked to him like some lost and wayward IKEA display that had somehow wandered off from the megastore. Upon the couch sat a man in a metal suit who seemed to sort of teeter in his seat. This was undoubtedly Mark the Mechanoid. "That's Mark," Supreme said as he strolled towards the furniture.
Yeah, I kinda figured that,
Crip replied. This seemed to draw Mark out of whatever stupor he may have been in, as the helmeted head swiveled to meet his gaze. He rose up from his seat, staggering a little bit, looking almost drunk as he did so. He offered a little wave and spoke in a strange, modulated tone. "Hey, how's it going?" he said with a slight nod of his helmet.
Not bad. I'm Donovan,"
Crip replied. "Mark, this is Crip. He's that comedian who knows about the deep state," Supreme explained, excitedly.
Well,
Crip began, but seeing the strange, excited, and almost wild light in Supreme's eyes, decided not to clarify any further.
Yeah, it's me. I'm Crip, I guess.
Hidden behind his face shield mask, Mark's eyes widened a bit for a moment in fear. Had they sent an agent to find or collect him? This, of course, was idiotic, as why would a secret government agency send a wheelchair-bound comedian online shitposter as an agent? Were his mind not as addled by narcotic hangovers, hunger, thirst, and all-around agony as it was? He'd have likely realized this in much shorter order. Crip's confused and rather telling expression said enough. Mark shuffled over toward the power chair, extending his metal-sheathed hand for a handshake. Crip looked sarcastically at the gauntlet before him before raising his own thin and slightly atrophied hand and accepting the gesture. Behind the mask, Mark raised an eyebrow, thinking to himself that at this rate the warehouse would likely be filled with stray freaks and weirdos, collected like pets by the indestructible moron who was their host. "So you'll be staying with us a while then?" he asked, taking a pull from his water hose.
I guess. For a bit at least.
Crip replied, for the first time genuinely unsure of just what he'd gotten himself into. "Well, there's TV, weed, and I think Supreme's got some booze around here somewhere, if you drink," he said, before turning back towards the couch. "Excuse me, my head is spinning a little bit. Been a big few days, and I kinda need to sit down." Crip glanced down at his chair.
Yeah, I know the feeling.
He joked crassly as Mark returned to his seat. Supreme eagerly then led him about the living space, showing him the cooler in which some random food and drinks were kept, the snack bar, which was loaded with chips and other assorted junk food, the rack of his uniforms, finally, then coming to the arcade motion ride, the prize of his collection. "Feel free to play this whenever," he said with a smile. Crip again looked down at his chair and then to his disused pencil-thin legs.
Thanks. I'll make sure to just jump on that if I feel like it. So, you two live here?
"I do. Mark's just kind of visiting," Supreme replied. "Extended stay, you might say," Mark added.
Are you building some sort of super team or something?
Crip asked. Supreme looked over to Mark and then back to Crip, his eyebrow raised as though the idea was a novel one. He thought about it for a moment. If Crip proved to have some sort of unique gift or helpful attribute, the trio of them would be like something straight from a TV show. "Well," Supreme began, trailing off as he thought. "No," Mark interjected. "Though we did team up to fuck up some narcos. That was fun." Supreme seemingly ignored this comment. "Well, I'm like a Superman. He's like an Iron Man. Supreme, Mark the Mechanoid, and..." Crip already saw where this was going.
No, don't fucking say it.
"And Wheels," Supreme said, completing his thought, much to his own joy and amusement.
Fuck it. Nope. Call me Crip all you like, just not fucking Wheels. God damn it.
"Too late. Once he comes up with a nickname, he never stops," Mark said with a weak chuckle. "Nah, okay, fine. You're Crip," Supreme said, relenting. "Edison, what the fuck?" Mark protested. "Come on, Mechanoid. Dude's in a wheelchair. Least we can do is let him pick his own team name. And remember, it's Supreme. So, this is a fucking team now. I'm in a perpetual hangover from hell. He's about as spry as Stephen Hawking, and you're calling us a super team now." Mark failed to realize that Supreme actually had no idea who Stephen Hawking was. If he knows anything about the deep state or more stuff about Nazis, he can be like our guy in the chair, Supreme said, still beaming with excitement at the new idea. His mind was very much like that of a child in this way, in that once something excited him, it was often difficult, if not impossible, to get him to rethink it until it resulted in disaster. I mean, they seem like the real bad guys these days, right? Secret shadow government and actual Nazis. Mark shook his head and sulked slightly. Oh, please, no. No, no, no. Can't we just go kill some more drug cartels or something? They're bad guys and we know how to find them. We can kill cartel guys anytime. If we can manage to take down secret government Nazis, we'll literally be saving the world, Supreme replied eagerly.
So, you think the deep state shadow government are also Nazis?
Crip asked, equally confused and bemused by this somewhat inexplicable link Supreme had made in his mind at some point. Well, aren't they?
It would be kind of hard to know since they're secret, right? They could be furries for all we know,
Crip replied, deciding that there was no sense in not taking this very broken logic to its furthest extent. What are furries? Supreme asked. Never mind, Donovan, do not answer that, Mark said sternly, not wishing his idiot friend to fall down yet another stupid rabbit hole. No, wait. What are furries? Supreme asked again, now genuinely curious. God damn it, Mark muttered to himself as Crip cracked a wicked grin.
So, it starts with an idea and a suit.
Nearly an hour had passed, with Crip needlessly informing Supreme of every trope and detail he could think of regarding the furry community. Supreme was a mix of amused, confused, and disgusted, as the comedian casually described what he imagined the smell of a furry convention might be like. The notion of mostly grown adults spending an entire day in heavy, full-body costumes almost caused Supreme to feel a bit queasy as he compared the scent to a poorly ventilated gym he had once worked out at, only brought to the extreme. Crip spared no detail, either real or made up, and Mark merely groaned and rolled his eyes within his helmet, too physically weak to really interrupt effectively, and too mentally tired to bother trying.
And that's what yiffing is,
Crip said, completing his entirely unnecessary lecture. Supreme's face was contorted in a confluence of revulsion and disbelief. And they do this on the weekends and for events? He asked, astonished that such an odd subculture could even exist.
Some do it kind of full-time,
Crip replied, knowing that this was most likely a lie, as it was improbable to assume many, if any, suited up every day. He gestured to Mark, who at this point was laid out upon the sofa once again, groaning softly out of hunger pains and a swelling migraine.
Take Mechboy here. If cyborgs were an animal that could fuck, he'd be considered a furry.
Fuck you, Wheels. I may be a guy in a suit, but you're more cyborg than I am with that Geo-Metro body brace you cruise around in, Mark spat.
See? They also get really defensive when you make a joke about their fursona,
Crip added. Supreme contemplated all he had just been told. Never really one for the internet outside of the occasional creepypasta, viral videos of girls twerking and the classic epic fail compilations. The existence of such a community confounded and confused him. Likewise, being far from what might be described as an enlightened or considerate thinker, it took a significant amount of mental energy to embrace the live and let live perspective he'd been trying to foster on a hobby that affected him in no way other than confusion and a slight tinge of personal distaste. That's kind of fucked up, Supreme stammered, unsure of why he'd inquired further in the first place and somewhat regretting his decision.
You know,
Crip continued, even though no one else in the room wanted him to.
Some people believe that furries may have ancient Sasquatch DNA,
he lied. What the fuck are you talking about? Mark croaked. Yeah, what do you mean? Supreme added, his confusion now deepening even further.
Well, you know how white people have between 1 and 2% Neanderthal DNA?
Asked Crip, setting himself up for the avalanche of bullshit that was to follow. They do? Supreme asked.
You do. I'm Mexican.
You are?
Well, half,
Crip admitted with a shrug.
All the same, white people have that old caveman juju flowing through. I wonder if maybe furries aren't the result of some bored caveman who decided to fuck a Sasquatch or something.
Yeah, well, that only tracks if Sasquatches were real. Mark replied with a groan.
The fuck they aren't. Listen, my cousin Pedro...
Crip had no cousin Pedro.
...was hiking in the mountains in Canada once, and he swears he saw one of the Bigfoot motherfuckers just strolling around like he owned the place. Said he was 9 feet tall, built like a pro wrestler.
And likewise, none of that was true. No shit. So, he really saw one? Supreme asked, his attention now rapt, as his short attention span was as eager as he was to move on from the previous conversation.
Oh yeah, tried to get a picture, but the big fucker just ran off into the woods. Bullshit,
Mark retorted.
It's true. What, do you think I'm lying?
Crip asked. I know you're lying. It's all bullshit.
Is it because I'm Mexican?
Crip replied, fighting the urge to smirk and chuckle once again.
What? Fucking... No! No, it's that...
Mark stammered.
Listen, if you've got some hang-ups about brown people, the worst thing you can do is, with your racism is deny it. Not to me. I'm not even judging. But to yourself. I'm not racist!
Mark replied, clearly frustrated, as intended.
I'm not saying you are. I'm just saying maybe you have some latent beliefs or ideas you haven't come to terms with. Admitting it is the first step to addressing it. I'm not a fucking racist!
Mark repeated, almost falling into a coughing fit due to the exertion.
Well, good then. Keep that attitude, dude. It'll take work, but I'm sure you'll be able to overcome that hate you carry around inside. I believe in you, man.
Inside his helmet, Mark rolled his eyes in annoyed defeat as he groaned in absolute irritation for taking the bait. It was something he'd encountered in prison many times. He should have known better.
Anyway,
Crip continued,
they come in all kinds of varieties.
Who do? Supreme asked.
Well, the Sasquatches and Bigfoots. I mean, if I was to say Ice Bigfoot, what comes to mind?
Supreme paused, thinking on it, as one might a bar trivia question before his eyebrows shot up in a delightful insight. A Yeti! He exclaimed, clearly proud for making the connection.
Exactly. I forget who goes where otherwise, but I know Bigfoot and Sasquatch are supposed to be from different parts of the country. But anyway, you should go fight a Yeti.
Crip grinned as this stone train of thought meets a stream of consciousness improv finally yielded some humorous endgame. Fight a Yeti? But why? He's not a bad guy, right?
He could be. Legend has it, it's torn hikers and mountaineers to pieces over the years for being in his territory,
Crip argued.
Innocent people, you know?
Supreme thought on this as deeply as his mind would allow. But isn't that just like him defending? Supreme began, before being cut off.
Let's use it, or they, them, here. No need to presume his gender.
Crip just couldn't stop himself. Yeah, okay, sorry. So, it's that just like it...
Them!
Crip said, needlessly correcting him for the sake of the bit. Oh, okay, so, isn't that just them defending, their territory?
It could be. Or it could be that...
Crip faltered and paused, realizing he didn't have a joke lined up.
They just... love the taste of human flesh. And climate change. They're pissed about climate change.
They eat people? Supreme asked in shock.
Sure, yeah. Can't get enough of us. Especially hikers, because they're all muscles and full of wheatgrass juice or something. And it's all because of climate change.
That sounds pretty monster-like. Might say villainous, Supreme replied, now comfortable that a hero element had been reintroduced into the conversation.
Yeah, you could say that. And you could also say that if one guy was able to both beat up a Yeti and prove that they're real at the same time, won't really matter what shit people say about him on the internet, or on podcasts, or on stage.
Grip agreed. Supreme thought on the accolades he could earn with this one battle. Crip, he felt, was quite convincing, between his cousin's account and his clear understanding of their pronouns. Supreme had never thought about pronouns seriously before, seeing them as goofy internet stuff. But as he'd never met a Sasquatch, or a Bigfoot, or a Yeti before, he realized he really didn't know what their whole sex and gender thing might be about. And after all, he was trying to be a hero for all people, so minding things people regarded as sensitive was probably a good look to go after. But the idea was there. With his speed and enhanced senses, he reasoned that if anyone could catch a Yeti, it would be him. And should the ferocious man-eater put up a fight, he could present its broken body to the world as proof that he slew the monster. Maybe he could do it on Hogan, he thought to himself. That would be cool. Okay, so, where would I find a Yeti? Specifically. I know it's like up in Alaska, near the North Pole or something, right? Once more, Supreme began speaking before realizing he didn't know what he was talking about.
Yeah, way up there in the frozen north. But remember, they're pissed because their habitat is shrinking. Because of?
Yeah, climate change. I get it. They're hippies or something, Supreme replied, brushing the matter off as he focused on the fantasy of defeating the Yeti and making history. Crip let the bit go.
So you think you're ready for the challenge there, big guy?
He smiled broadly as he spoke, the last chance to avoid the raucous laughter building up inside of him. I am. Mark spoke up then.
Are you fucking kidding me? Dude, the guy is fucking with you. No, I'm not.
Crip replied quickly.
Yeah, you fucking are. There's no such thing as a Yeti. How do you know? Have you been to the Great Frozen North? Canadian Siberia, as it's called by the natives?
Crip shot back.
The fuck are you talking about? Nobody calls it that! Are you calling the Inuit people's traditions wrong?
Crip asked, shooting Mark a very obvious side-eye.
What? No! Fuck you, dude! I'm not a fucking racist. I'm not here to judge. I'm here to help,
Crip replied, with an unnervingly genuine look of concern and compassion. Mark laid his head back, shaking it from side to side in defeat. He'd met his fair share of jokers in prison as well, and knew when they were on a wind-up mission, there was no stopping them. He sighed and pulled a sip from his piss hose, while reviewing his life's misdeeds, wondering what forces of cynical cosmic justice had put him in such a position as this.
So, Supreme, are you ready to make history?
Crip asked, returning his attention to the living meme before him. Supreme nodded, his eyes steely and filled with misplaced and ill-defined resolve. I am, he said, puffing his chest. Let's do this. As Supreme rocketed through the air on a northwestern trajectory, a pair of highly skilled and underpaid engineers sat at their stations, deep below the Earth's surface at an undisclosed location. Their names were Dennis and Tim. When they would head to work each day, both would take a city bus from the small nondescript company town they lived in, and after a short walk from their stop, they would wait on the street corner near a derelict newspaper box. While there, they would chat idly about nothing in particular while waiting for the blacked-out SUV to arrive and take them on the final leg of their daily sojourn. Once it did, the two would smile as the large man in dark suits and sunglasses who would emerge each day, greet them with a good morning, and then tilt their heads forward to accept the black bags they would wear over their heads for the remainder of their commute. Initially, upon starting at the facility, The men in the SUV would typically be silent, stoic, and would perform their duties without a word. But after 3 or 4 months of driving their charges to and from the drop point and hearing them chat freely as co-workers, both men had come to know the driver as Dwayne and his partner as Eric. Eric had been a Marine and had served in Iraq. To hear him tell it, he had been selected for special service in his current department after a personnel review by the Marine Corps. He was deemed too smart and too capable to be wasted as a grunt. In reality, following a completely ordinary, and by ordinary it is of course implied complicated and bothersome separation from the military, Eric had inadvertently applied to an ad he found on Craigslist seeking a discreet private driver, only to be hired by a shadowy organization that was clearly government funded and privately run. He knew better than to ask questions. Dwayne, as it turned out, had answered the same online classified ad seeking discreet drivers. However, he had what his father would tell him to say in his interview, private sector experience. This experience had been working as a driver in security for a trio of private party strippers who would sometimes take their service offerings to broader levels than advertised on their website. Dwayne's father, an ex-cop, taught him terms such as executive protection and confidential transportation. After lying extensively on his resume and applying through the website, being invited to sit down with the over-caffeinated HR rep and recite what he'd been trained to say felt like winning the lottery. His previous driving experience notwithstanding, his career path until that point had been largely comprised of call centers and retail cashier experiences. His father's tutelage and advice helped significantly both during his application process and interview, and before he knew it, Dwayne got to ride shotgun in a very fancy truck, in a very fancy suit, tailor-made for him by the craftsmen and women at Land's End, with a gun. Dennis and Tim rode comfortably in the back seats as they were accustomed to. Upon hire, having been instructed not to discuss private or personal affairs so as to not compromise security, they tended to keep their conversations topical between one another. They had previously both agreed that they were grateful to their employees for springing for the luxury edition of their daily ride, as the seats felt enveloping and of the highest quality of what they mistakenly believed to be actual leather. Upon mentioning this for the first time, a regular invitation was unintentionally opened with Dwayne about the comfort and quality of their car. "Right? I know," Dwayne said the first time the seats were mentioned, as well as regularly reiterating every time an awkward silence would happen to fall during the ride. "Man, this is some serious class we've got here. Secret agent shit, right?" Dwayne would fill these silences as once he got what seemed like a very positive reaction from the 3 other passengers when making this comment, and sadly, never thought to come up with anything new to say. Eric would nod and roll his eyes behind his standard issue Oakleys, while Dennis and Tim would look blindly at one another through their blackout bags, nod and murmur something about how comfortable they were, and usually the silence would then resume. Down in their lab, as Dennis and Tim put the finishing touches on the code which would operate their newest project, the sliding glass doors which served as the only ingress or egress from their lab flew open, almost uncharacteristically fast it seemed. Through them stormed the General, cigar tucked between his teeth with smoke rising into what was supposed to be a clean room. Tim looked up at him from his workstation and saw he was visibly irritable. He was always visibly irritable, but on this precise occasion his irritability seemed to be an extra stride, as though he had enjoyed a hearty breakfast of stubbed toes and divorce papers. Perhaps it was his stormy energy which had scared the automatic doors into opening so fast. "Where are my goddamn drones?" the General growled. We're just putting the finishing touches on them now. Should be mission ready in, I don't know, Tim?" Dennis replied. I'd say 2 hours, Tim guessed, not appreciating being thrown on the spot like that. You have 30 minutes. Are they at least ready for a test? Asked the general. We could take them for a whirl around the base, I guess. Check to see if the navigational arrays are said Tim, cut off with another smoky growl. Then make them fucking fly already. Show me on that screen. The general gestured to a large monitor that hung over the main workstations. It was in fact the mission control monitor, which provided a whole range of very important flight data for the drones, and was made even more important if more than one was in the air. Dennis motioned as though he was about to explain this to the general, but as the boss's attention was now fully transfixed on the large screen he soon expected to see the drone video on, Tim stopped him, simply switching monitors to avoid problems. Shaking his head, partially at the stupidity of the situation, and partially wondering if he shouldn't have gone to work for Google or Amazon or some other massive evil corporation that was at least publicly traded, Tim input the start codes, and remotely opened a small silo-style hatch in a room down the hall. The hatch led upwards and out of what had been set up to serve as a hangar for numerous green glowing round machines, each the circumference of an extra-large pizza, depending on where you order from. Along their bottoms and along their flanks of their casing, numerous specialized arms were folded neatly into the body, each with their own various functions. Atop the donut-shaped aerial vehicle stemmed two stalks, each about 6 inches in length, at the end of which special glowing green camera lenses were mounted, giving the curious appearance of crab's eyes. They were hung along the wall, each within its own small charging cubby. From within their ranks, two began to glow brighter, and began levitating out of their cubbies and up towards the bright open sky above. Their eye stalks twitched and scanned around, and the levitating donut drones looked curious and just a bit confused as they did so. Back in the main lab, at the now makeshift observation station, the general watched, brows furrowed, and the stink of his cigar beginning to cause Dennis to choke just a bit. He glared at the video, and then at the engineers, then back to the video again. He huffed and raised an eyebrow, leading both other parties to remain entirely bewildered as to if such was a good or bad thing. "Why aren't they making that noise?" the general asked. "Noise, sir?" Tim replied. "You know, the drone noise, that wee sound. That one." "Well, we were given authorization to use some of that technology on loan from the 51 guys who were here last week. So, this uses just gravity. It's silent. Mostly silent," he explained. The general almost smiled at this. "Silent. I like it. Stealth is key in combat." Yes, sir. Yes, sir." "You ever been in combat, son?" the general asked, his eyes now almost glazed over at the sight of a brand new baby weapons platform. No, sir. I can't say I have," Tim replied. "Well, there's nothing like it. Shows a man what he's truly made of. I remember when my boots hit the ground in Panama. I was just a boy then. No older than you." "I'm 33, sir," Tim interjected, but to no avail. "The enemy was all around us, in the jungle and the foxholes. My uncle was in Nam, told me all about what to expect. I cut the ears off an entire folk band we found hiding while on patrol, and it was through that interrogation and the iron will it took to complete that mission that we were able to find the bad guys up the road from our position. We got into some close quarters shit there, son. Bayonets were attached, if you catch my drift." "Of course, sir. Now, if you watch to the left of the screen are the tracking cameras from outside. They'll follow the drone's movements as they fly. The center and right portions are the drone's cameras and sensor readings. Whatever they see, we can see," Tim explained, gently but necessarily steering the conversation back on track. Very good, mumble-grumbled the general. As they watched the two green donut drones rise out of their silo and begin hovering above the airy desert floor, each scanned the area with its crab-eye antennae, the flopping, glowing appendages going in different directions, causing the drones to appear almost drunk. The general's right eye twitched with annoyance. Yet in the next moment, just before he was about to grumble about defective wastes of money, something he had considerably more experience with as a command officer than combat throughout his entire military career, something unexpected happened. The drone's eye stalks righted themselves, aligning forward in the way one expects eyes to do. The two drones, though previously hovering randomly about at different heights above the ground, came quickly into a tight diagonal formation, and immediately shot up into the air several hundred feet before coming to a perfect stop. The screen above the observers lit up as sensor data was shown and processed at lightning speed. Tim nodded to Dennis, who nodded knowingly in return, as he began punching commands into the workstation keyboard, and after a moment, several lines of number sequences began populating the sensor screen. The drones turned sharply in place, each of their visual readouts plotting a course along the base. Now we have their codes, so we can track them. But when they go dark, you'll see that none of the base's scanners will pick them up, Dennis explained proudly while pushing a single key. Now they're in autonomous mode, but they know the mission and they will stick to it to the letter. What the general watched next almost brought a tear to his eye, as the two machines raced perfectly at high speed above and around the facility with the precision and grace he could only imagine wielding baby Hellfire missiles. It was as close to adorable as the general was capable of regarding when not in the presence of either his grandchildren or small goats. It would revolutionize warfare. But first, there was the idiot hero to deal with. The general issued his commands. Deploy them on mission now. I want 2 tracking the primary target, who seems to be in Canada. I want 2 others to go and get my hardware back since the big guy's out for a while. The wind grew noticeably colder as Supreme blasted through the clouds into the bright open sky and northward, the suspected stomping grounds of the man-eater he sought. Mark had naturally tried to talk him out of it, and almost did, when he pointed out that there were plenty of other real-life bad guys he could be going after. But another word from Crip and a reminder that nothing could ever top discovering and beating the shit out of the Yeti was enough to have him off and into the air. He didn't have much of a plan as to how to search, short of some GPS coordinates he pulled from his phone, highlighting areas of suspected sightings of the beast, which he rocketed towards as best as he could manage. However, after roughly an hour of hurtling over dense forests and eventually snow-covered wilderness, he realized he needed to work the whole matter out a bit deeper if he was to hope for any success. He looked at his phone. He found, generally, that if he dropped down low enough to the ground, he could often find a signal. Supreme quickly found himself frustrated when in the dense Canadian wilderness he found 0 cell service. He scrolled impotently along the now useless navigation app before putting the phone away in a huff. Before him were heavy, snow-capped trees which extended for as far as the eye could see. Ahead of him, some few miles off, Supreme could see a small mountain, snow ornamenting the tops of any ledges or rock formations along its slope. He hovered there, low beneath the clouds, still and silent. He was beginning to feel like an idiot sent on a wild goose chase. There might not even be a Yeti, and even if there were, how would he find it? The clouds were beginning to grow darker back behind the mountain, and he had no access to his GPS. He tried to think of a solution, a way around this stillness and nothingness he had apparently flown all this way for. Then, from below, down within the impenetrable snow-capped canopy of trees, a noise distracted him. It was a shrill sort of squeal, followed by a grunt. He was easily 100 feet above it, and it wasn't very loud, but he could hear it, and it annoyed him. Looking down with his supreme set of eyes, he found he could peer through the trees and down to the forest floor. There, trudging through knee-deep snow, was an elk. As Supreme listened closer, he noticed that he could hear the creature's steps as they crunched into the snow. He listened closer. He focused, and soon noted the sound of its heavy breaths. A little more attention, and he heard the rhythmic sound of the animal's heart. It was then that an idea occurred to him. If he were to kill the elk in the forest, it would be quiet again, and he could concentrate on devising a solution to his predicament. He was just about to head down to use his laser eyes to cut the beast in half when another, entirely different idea came to mind that didn't involve slaughtering wildlife at all. He would listen for the Yeti. Surely it would have to make some sounds that were different than other creatures. If he could remain still and silent and clear his mind of distraction, he could float along and simply listen for the thing. It reminded him of a hippie girl he had tried to hook up with years ago. It brought him once to a meditation session which he found equally boring and dumb hippie bullshit. Had anyone told him then that one day he would use that hippie bullshit to track down the legendary monster of the snows, the Yeti, he would have probably laughed at them, called them a series of unkind terms, and then left after crop dusting the room. But in that moment, he was distracted with thoughts of the hippie girl, their time together, her yoga pants. It was in that moment, though, the reality and difficulty of actually clearing his mind of anything at all was brought into perspective. So that's why they called it practicing meditation, because you need to work at it to get good at it. It made sense at last. It also, he reasoned, was a dumb and boring waste of time if you weren't hunting Yetis. This could take a while. Mark groaned as Crip wheeled about the warehouse of solitude aimlessly. He was still amused by how easily he had gotten Supreme to just go shooting off in search of the Yeti, but was now wishing he had asked for a lift home first. With no idea how long he might be, there was little to do other than look around, snack on the stacks of junk food, drink hard liquor, or smoke more of Supreme's weed. Crip did each of these precisely in reverse order, but after roughly an hour, the boredom was beginning to set in with sincerity. He wheeled himself up beside Mark, who was as miserable as usual. Crip had found himself wondering just what the metal man looked like under the helmet, but quickly dusted these ponderings upon realizing that this knockoff Master Chief from the game Halo was best thought of as he was, a miserable, writhing bit of metal with a guy inside who clearly made constantly bad choices.
You know, we're actually really the same, you and I,
Crip said to the miserable pile of meat scrap before him. Oh yeah? Mark replied wearily. How's that?
We're both stuck in machines. Machines that let us move about and, live our lives.
Had Crip poured any more sincerity into at least the presentation of his words, his ruse would have been obvious. It was still obvious to Mark, who had given up any hope of this strange crippled comedian being anything close to sincere. Yet still, a pang of understanding rolled through his mind before he quickly dismissed the notion, remembering where he was and who he was talking to. Fuck you, he said tersely.
No, man. Seriously. I'm not even kidding. I lived my whole life in this chair and will probably die in it. But I don't resent it. Even though I can feel like I'm trapped in it, I see it as the means by which I am made more free.
Crip said, his every word now dripping with a dangerous candor. Mark considered this a moment. I guess, okay, yeah. Okay, I guess I see it.
I guess the only difference is that I'm not drinking my own piss.
God damn it, Mark spat. Let me guess, you only do it when you want to.
Yes, which is never. which is considerably less piss drinking than you've done. Fuck, at least you've got your legs,
said Crip as he proceeded to spin in place in his chair. Is there a point to this?
I'm just saying, if I was you, even if I was dying, which I technically am, I'd still want to walk around and throw cars around or whatever it is you do for fun.
You have no idea how much agony I am in.
Ah, do you want me to feel sorry for you?
Just please shut the fuck up. Crip had another barb to throw at Mark, but was distracted suddenly by the sight of something even more peculiar than the rest of his day had been. 2 glowing green drones, with glowing green crab eyes, silently floated in through the open bay door just behind where Mark lay. For the first time all day and in quite a while, Crip was speechless. Thank fuck, Mark said with a sigh of relief.
Dude? Is it normal for little UFO-looking things to come floating in here?
Crip asked, his eyes glued to the hovering machines which floated closer and closer to Mark. Yeah, they show up on Tuesdays to play cards with the Jersey Devil. Crip, please, I'm begging you, just shut the fuck. Mark's words were cut short as he was suddenly rendered immobile. The flying green donuts drones had each deployed a series of tendrils, which, like great predatory snakes, shot themselves into various spots along Mark's suit. There was nothing he could do. He was paralyzed, yet curiously, also very comfortable suddenly. Supreme drifted along slowly through the air, his eyes closed and his ears closely attuned to the sounds of anything at all. He had been at it for roughly 40 minutes, and had now begun the slow zigzagging search pattern he had decided on as he floated up along the mountain's ridges and slopes. The weather had gotten heavier, with thick, blinding snow falling everywhere. The wind howled along what little exposed rock remained. But he was unperturbed. With respect to what he was himself actually capable of, he was a floating Zen master, not properly enlightened, but of a definitively clear mind. Supreme had always been regarded as being dumb growing up. Yet now, here his empty head was proving an asset. As he came up on a broad ridge, which was some 100 feet below a higher cliff and several 100 feet above the earth below, he heard something. It was wholly remarkable. It was unlike anything he had ever heard before, and yet at the same time seemed to convey a message or sense he could understand somewhere deep within himself on a level he couldn't really understand or describe. They were grunts. Heavy, deep grunts. Kind only made by an enormous beast. Yet in the grunts, almost as though it were a form of subtext, Supreme could hear or sense something else. He could hear intent. He could hear frustration. And he could hear a significant number of curse words. He listened closer. He heard then, clear as crystal. And yet, the subtext felt more akin to fuck. He paused and continued listening intently. The growls and grunts, along with the corresponding curses and discontent, only grew louder as Supreme floated on forward, until he could tell he was just above the source. Opening his eyes, he looked down upon the flat ridgeline and cliff face, but saw nothing. Coming to land, he looked about, almost straining his eyes as he attempted to peer through the blinding wall of blowing snow. Yet he could see nothing. Then, from what felt like absolutely nowhere, a large object, roughly the size of a tree, came swinging in and bashed him in the face. The blow sent him flying backwards, causing him to hit the rock wall which was apparently behind him, bringing shards of shattered stone down around him. As he sat up, he had to shake his head a bit to recover from the hit. He hadn't been hit in a way he could feel in what felt like ages, and were it not for the slight discomfort it caused him, he would have almost found it charming. But there was no time for nostalgia or sentiment. Peering through the white, he could finally see him. His opponent, his monster, his yeti. Supreme rose to his feet. "Alright there, big guy. You ready for this?" he said, hopping around like a boxer. "Brrrah!" the creature responded, confusing Supreme, as he just felt inexplicably offended on behalf of his mother. The two closed with one another, and brought as much hell as could fit onto that frozen ledge in a furious battle which would shake the mountain.
Chilling tales for dark nights.